Hi, my name is Morgan, and I created this course. This is the first in a series of about 4 videos, which are going to explain to you how to use frameworks that I made to create very strong or even exceptional answers to all types of interview questions that you'll encounter in traditional panel or MMI interview scenarios. So I'll explain at the end of the video what the rationale was for designing this course, why it's designed the way it is, so that we can jump in right now to the framework addressed in this video, which is the general ethical and healthcare question framework. Now, the first principle that you have to know about interviewing for medical school is that there is no such thing as a strong answer if it is disorganized and if it is not easy for the interviewer to follow. You can give the smartest, most thoughtful, most cerebral answer, and if it is not very easy for them to follow, if they get even a little bored or distracted, it's not going to be an effective answer. I remember I learned in cognitive psychology that people have an involuntary preference for stimuli that they find easier to process mentally. So it is to your advantage, and I would say necessary, to create easy, streamlined, simple answers to follow. So with that in mind, I created these frameworks, and they're all designed around giving straightforward answers, which are easy to follow for the interviewer. And another benefit of the framework is it also helps you draw out the information on your own, because you are not going to, in the 2 minutes outside the door, think of your entire answer. It's not practical, and it's not a reasonable expectation, and you'll just get flustered. I'll talk more when we meet in the course about what you want to do outside the door. But for now, we're going to take a look at the first framework. Now, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so this is the general framework for ethical and healthcare questions. These make up the large majority of questions that you will encounter in MMI at all of the variety of schools that I interviewed at. I believe all of the schools in general, and also quite a few questions in traditional panel and personal interview styles. So here is a practice question which I wrote. We'll use it as an exemplar in this video. So this is quite representative of what you would see. And you'd have 2 minutes outside the door to prepare to answer this question. You are a medical student doing your clerkship rotation at a family doctor's office. There are several other medical students working at the same clinic, but you are each supervised by a different physician. Right as patients begin to arrive at the beginning of the day, you notice one of the other medical students swaying and stumbling as they walk down the hallway ahead of you. Enter the room and discuss how you would proceed in this situation. So here we're going to break down the framework. And I have the question there for your reference throughout. So here's the framework. It's 9 steps. I know it looks overwhelming, and it can be overwhelming at the beginning. It is not reasonable to expect yourself to right off the bat be able to implement a 9-step framework. That's why I've highlighted in green which are the steps that are the core elements of your answer. The ones that remain in black are, so those being 2, 7, 8, and 9, are cherry on top type things that will bring your answer to the next level. So you when starting out implementing this framework, start out with 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6. That's your core answer, okay? And then once you're comfortable with that, start implementing the other elements. Now, it seems like a lot. And at the beginning, you might start thinking, oh, what's the next step? I've done 3, now what was 4? But as you practice, it is just going to become intuitive, and you're not going to be having to think through what each step is. You'll just be doing it, okay? So step 1, state the problem or conflicting interests. Ask yourself, what is the conflict here, and state it plainly. Now, when I say state it plainly, I literally mean state it as if you were explaining it to a parent, or if you know, like what your internal monologue would just be about, oh, what the issue is here. Don't go in and say, this is a conflict between autonomy and justice. I spoke to, I was out for lunch with a physician once, and she was one of the interviewers, and I'd asked her, if there are any kind of silly things that medical students do. And she said that a lot of medical applicants use these words that she's never heard of before, and like beneficence and non-maleficence. Those are not words that we use in medicine basically ever. Those are academic purist medical ethics terms, which are not used, which are not commonplace, and they're sort of jarring when you hear them. And being like dropping a word like that in your answer does not make you seem like a strong applicant. We say in medicine, you demonstrate that you are really able to understand something when you're able to explain it to a patient in plain language. The same applies here. And again, like I said before, you do not want to be making your interviewer think to understand your answer. So state plainly for them what the issue is. So for example, there are different ways you can do this, by the way. There's not a one specific right answer. For example, for this question, I might say, this is a conflict between my responsibility to the safety of the patients and my desire not to embarrass my peer or make them feel uncomfortable. You see, in saying that, I've just identified, just as a normal person just looking at this situation, what comes to mind? What's the issue here? Well, you have a responsibility to make sure that, this person, that something isn't up and that patients are going to be put in danger. And, also it's an uncomfortable situation because you might make your peer feel uncomfortable. Another way to say it, or another thing you could say is, it's a conflict between my responsibility to patient safety and my responsibility to get to my supervisor if they're expecting me. Because it's the beginning of the day and I have work responsibilities while also addressing the situation. So after you state that plainly, okay, now you would go to step 2. Again, this is a little bit higher level, but acknowledge that the situation is difficult. It shows that you are humble and not overly headstrong, to show that you appreciate that these ethical questions are challenging. When you encounter real ethical, quandaries in the workplace, they are challenging. And showing that you have an appreciation for that shows a maturity. So, again, just say why it's difficult quite plainly. So this is difficult because, it's important that I navigate this situation carefully because I may, it might make my peer feel uncomfortable. It could be uncomfortable for me. And also I have to get to clinic. But it is important that I address this. So again, I'm just stating plainly what the issue is and why it's difficult. So again, something that I want to stress is the importance of step 1 and also step 2, but mostly step 1 is right off the bat, you're showing the interviewer as soon as you enter the room in your first 2 or 3 sentences that you get what's up. When you state the conflicting interests or state the problem and they hear you say that, they think, oh, okay, this person gets it. And right off the bat, you're starting out on a good foot, on the right foot. So step 3, what additional information do you need to know? Now, what you have to know is that all of these questions, all of these scenarios are always designed with necessary information omitted. So they're, because, like every situation in life, when you encounter a situation, you have to do more information gathering. That's always your first step. So what would you need to know here? You can also say, from whom you would need to know that information. For example, if you encounter a question where, you think that there might be some law involved or some protocol that you're supposed to follow, it's okay to say, I don't know what the policy is surrounding this, but, I would ask someone to find out if there's a specific policy about how we're supposed to act in these situations. Again, saying that you don't know is okay, as long as you say what you would do to fill in that knowledge gap or find the answer. So really what you're going to do here is you want to scrutinize the question. Find out what pieces of information you would need to know. So what I'm going to do here, you'll see, is you do 3, 4, and 5. And for these ethical type questions, as you can see with the point that I wrote there with the 2 asterisks, you cycle through them. So I'm gonna say what a piece of additional information I need to know, and then what the different options are, or the different sides based on that piece of information, and then what the ramifications or outcomes would be based on each one of those options to all people involved or all interested parties. And then I'm going to cycle back. So I'm going to go 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, until I've reached the logical endpoint of the situation or explored all the additional info. So that would look something like this. So what additional information do I need to know? Well, the first thing I would do is, I need to think about, when is my supervisor expecting me to get to clinic? So that's 3 additional information. Because if they're expecting me right at this moment, then I'm going to have to go let them know, hey, I just saw a situation that I think I need to see to really quickly. So I'll just be a few minutes late if that's okay. If I have a while until I have to be at clinic, then it's not an issue. So see, that was me saying what the different options were. Either I have to be here now, or I have to be there, or I have a bit of time, and then what the different ramifications are. The ramification being, I either tell them that I need to take a minute, or, really, in this situation, really not a ramification. Just I can continue proceeding with my investigation. So now I'm going to go back up to 3 for the next point. I need to know, am I even correct about what I saw? Does my peer have an explanation? There could be a variety of reasons. So that was, again, 3. Now I'll go on to 4, state the different options. Perhaps they just twisted their ankle. Perhaps I just saw them right as they were twisting their ankle and it looked like they were stumbling. If they explain that to me, then that's really the end of the situation. Perhaps, maybe they're intoxicated though in some way. Maybe they took a new sedating medication and they're overly sedated and they're not realizing the effect it's having on them. Or, maybe even more concerning than that, maybe they, are using recreational drugs, perhaps even to cope with stress or some personal issue. Again, so there I stated what additional information I would need to know. In other words, what their explanation was, state the different options that I could think of, and then state what the outcomes or ramifications would be. Those being, if it is the twisted ankle, then fine, situation over. If it's a serious, impairment of their ability, then I would need to continue investigating. Now, there are other things that I would want to ask. I'm not going to go 3, 4, 5 for every single one of them just for the sake of this video to make it more succinct. But for example, I might ask things like, are they planning to work today? Again, maybe they're not planning on working today. Maybe they are a bit intoxicated, but they're just coming in to get their lunch and then leave. Maybe they forgot their lunchbox. Or maybe they are planning on working today, in which case it's more concerning because that could present a safety concern for the patients. I would want to know, how much of whatever substance they used, how much they consumed. I would want to know what their reason was. I might encourage them. Ultimately, after doing 3, 4, and 5 a few times, if I got to a point where I thought, ultimately they are intoxicated, I don't think that it's safe for them to work with patients, or at least I'm not in a position where I can assess their safety, I'd say that I think, that they need to speak to the supervisor. If they say that they're not willing to talk to the supervisor, then I would say that I would have to talk to the supervisor. So now I've done 3, 4, and 5. I've basically worked my way through the situation. I've gotten to the end. Now it's number 6. This is like your summary statement. You explain what your decision is and what you are going to do based on the most important additional pieces of information that you ask. So that would look something like, and again, this is a very short summary. Don't summarize your whole answer because they'll get bored. Just say, ultimately, so if they are intoxicated, if they're not willing to step aside, they are planning to work, and they won't tell the supervisor, then I'm going to have to tell the supervisor because of the concern that it poses to patient safety. That's it. That's my whole summary. Again, and I hope this has been clear as I've been working through this framework, at every point I'm using very plain language. So now that we've done that, we've ended sort of the core answer. Now, 7, 8, and 9 are cherry on top type things that will bring your answer to the next level and really enhance it. So explain how you would act on your decisions. So, for example, this is an excellent time to show your empathy and your insight into the impact that your actions can have on people around you. So, initially I would make sure that when I spoke to them, I was doing it discreetly, maybe in a private setting, and doing it in a non-confrontational way so that, they don't feel like they're being ambushed, because this could be stressful for them. I would also be cautious not to sound like I was making an accusation, because it's very possible that I'm wrong and that they have a completely, benign explanation for this. I would also let them know before I told my supervisor if it ultimately came to that, so that they didn't feel blindsided. So again, what I'm doing there is, I'm just explaining how I would act on my decision and showing empathy. So number 8, now you would list the resources that you would recommend. So, for example, counseling, support groups, religious counsel. This is a great way to show that you recognize that you are not the be all and end all, that there are other resources which are valuable to people in the situation. So for example, if my friend is really struggling, I would say that they should maybe seek help from the school guidance counselor or from the undergraduate medical education office, like see the wellness center, see if there are resources that they would recommend, or if they have a protocol for what to do when students are in need. I could also suggest that they seek counseling outside of the school. I could also speak to them myself if they're comfortable confiding in me. And, perhaps maybe they would even want to talk to their supervisor. Maybe their supervisor could be of assistance if that's someone that they're comfortable confiding in and trusting. So now number 9, when you can, this is an excellent thing to add. Suggest policy changes that could address the systemic issues that led to the present situation. What's so impressive about when you do this as an applicant is it shows that you're thinking upstream. You're extrapolating from this one situation, recognizing that there are systems level issues that impact it, that lead to it, and showing that you can, contribute in a meaningful way to policy development, and you can think about the broader scheme of things. So you don't have to actually solve the situation. Just be creative in coming up with something. So for example, in this situation, maybe it would be helpful if there was an anonymous reporting system so that students can report concerns that they have about other students or other, supervisors or people they work with. Because not everyone is going to feel comfortable, like I said, I would be in this situation, going and talking to the student outright. People might be too afraid to do it, so it would be important for there to at least be a system so that they can express their concerns. I would also be valuable from the other perspective for my peer, for maybe there to be an anonymous way for students who are struggling to seek advice from the undergraduate medical education office or counseling office. Because, for example, it can be very stigmatizing to say, hey, I think I've developed a dependence on alcohol to deal with the stress of whatever's going on in my life. Maybe it would be, that could be a huge barrier to people seeking care. So maybe it would be valuable for there to just be a way that people can, just anonymously get support, like a kids help phone type thing for medical students. Okay, so those are steps 1 through 9. Again, it seems like a lot. And again, I promise you, start out working on 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then once you get comfortable with that, then you can implement the other ones, and you're not going to have to stress. It's not going to be as stressful trying to implement all of them. It will become more natural. Here I've presented them all sort of condensed at the bottom just for quick reference. Again, state the problem or conflicting interests very plainly. Acknowledge that the situation is difficult, what additional information you need, what all the options are, what the outcomes for all those options are. And then again, cycle through 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5. Summarize with your decision and why, given the different conditions from the additional information that you got, then how you would act on your decision, the additional resources you would recommend, and policy change. Okay, so one thing to point out here is that they're among these ethical and healthcare frameworks, the framework is very similar, but there's a slight different way to interpret it for healthcare questions. So we just talked about our ethical scenarios. And I want to point out, so I call them narrative, because essentially what we took out was a question. We took from the question, which was just, what would you do in this situation? Which some people might make the mistake of just answering, saying, oh, I would do this. But really, there's a whole process. There's a whole procedure to it. It's not just one thing. It starts out with information gathering, which is itself a process, and then leads to a series of behaviors too. So we sort of turned it into a narrative. So this little schematic here is how I envision what you're doing. You're starting out on this main path here, and then you get to a node. The first node or branch point is the first piece of information, additional information that you ask. Now, usually one of the options leads to the situation basically ending, and one option leads to the situation continuing. So, for example, the additional information that we asked for, okay, so what we saw. So, for example, I would ask them what their explain to them what I saw and ask what their explanation was. Now, if they just say, oh, they twisted their ankle or something, then the situation's basically over. I just ask them if they're feeling okay, and then maybe help them hobble over to clinic, or ask if they need to sit out for a bit. However, if they're like intoxicated or something, or if there's a serious medical issue, then the situation continues, and we continue down the main narrative, okay, until we get to another branching point. So, are they planning to work today? Again, if they're not planning to work today, situation over. If they are planning to work today, the plot thickens and it continues, and we continue following the narrative. Okay, so you sort of go down like that. You're essentially encountering a bunch of dichotomous branch points where you have a piece of information that either leads to the situation ending or the situation continuing to be of concern. You acknowledge the different ways in which the situation could just turn out to be benign, but the additional information that you would need to lead to that. But in order to fill out your answer, you follow this through to the end. It's actually sort of like what we do. I'm just realizing now as I'm recording this video, it's sort of like what we do in medical investigation. When someone presents with a problem, you get to a point and then you do a test, and that test rules out things along the way, until you've eventually ruled out everything else, and you realize that you have this one specific thing, maybe a big problem at the end. In contrast, so that's how you do steps 3, 4, and 5 for ethical problems. For healthcare problems, what do you think about this policy, or what do you think about implementing this idea? What 3, 4, and 5 look a little bit different. So essentially, your additional information, it's 3. You just ask up front, so I'll give you an example. Say we had a question, what do you think of making medical school 6 years long? So it's longer. What do you think about this? So, additional information that I would need would be, you just sort of actually just say your additional information and why you need to know it, but you're not making a narrative out of it, because there's no sort of story here. Okay, it's just a policy or a healthcare point. So I would say, additional information I would need to know is, what was the thinking behind making it 5 or 6 years? What goal were they trying to achieve? Would this affect all medical students, or would it just affect some medical students? Would this make the cost more burdensome on current medical students? How would this affect people who are already enrolled in medical programs? Things like that. So just showing that you're really thinking about all the different little nuances of the proposition. Then you go to step 4, stating all the options or sides. Essentially what that means for a healthcare problem is do your for arguments and then your against arguments. Do not jump between for and against. Don't say, this is a good thing, this is a bad thing. This is a good thing, this is a bad thing. It makes your answer, again, it makes it difficult to follow. And as I said at the beginning of this video, this is all about making your answer streamlined and clear. So do all of your pros and then all of your cons, okay? Essentially, it's also easier for you. It allows you to, it's like first start out by just making out the full pro argument and fleshing out that argument, and then make the full con argument. For step 5 is interlaced with step 4. So, as you're saying each one of your arguments for and each one of your arguments against, whenever you make an argument, talk about the outcomes that would have. Step 6, your summary point. Again, very succinctly, without restating your entire argument. Just state like your key points. So for example, pick you're for or against. So if I was going to say, if I was going to be for this argument, I'd say, overall, I think that it is a good idea to make it 5 or 6 years because medical students will get more clinical exposure in a very contained and controlled environment, have more learning experiences, and ultimately be stronger physicians when they start their independent practice. Again, it's a very short summary, just to put a nice bow on it at the end, okay? And then you do the exact same, then you just do 7, 8, 9 again. So you'd say, explain how you would act on your decision. How do you think the policy could be implemented? And then 8, list resources. Who else should be involved? What other stakeholders might be valuable in making this, in implementing this policy? And 9 would be, suggest additional policies that you could make or other systems level issues that could lead to this. So that is the end of the general ethical / healthcare framework. I know that it is a lot, and if you have questions about it, I'm very happy to answer them in our first lesson. But now I just want to take a few minutes to explain what the theory was behind designing this course. If you're already enrolled in the course, then fantastic. I look forward to seeing you at our first lesson. And if you're just watching this because you're considering whether to enroll in this course or not, then I think this part will be valuable for you. First of all, we made this video so that you're actually watching what is the first lesson or the first video in the course. So this is the first thing that people in the course will watch, so that you could make an informed decision about whether you want to participate in it. So what the idea behind this course is that I did med coaching for a year, and I found that these frameworks, which I made for myself when I was a medical school applicant, and were exceptionally helpful to me, were also very helpful to my students, and they really appreciated them, and they're a very effective teaching tool. So what I wanted to do is create a situation where I could facilitate a lot of students learning these frameworks and then taking turns practicing. So the way the course works is that you'll watch these videos that I'm making similar to this one that explain how the different frameworks work. So then when we're actually in the lesson, we can spend all of our time doing practice of implementing these frameworks to answer questions. So in terms of preparing for medical school interviews, it is very valuable to practice questions yourself. It is also very valuable to listen to other people answer questions, which is what is so valuable. A great strength of this course is that you'll have the opportunity to hear a lot of your peers, a lot of the other participants answer questions. Because when you hear other people give answers to questions after you prepare for them yourself, you'll think, oh, you know what, that was a really good point. I think I'll incorporate that into my answer too. Or also, you might hear someone make a point that you were going to make, and you hear it and you're like, wow, that landed very flat. That did not land the way I thought it was going to. I think I'm going to take that. I think I'm going to take that out of my answer. I think I'm going to go back to back to the drawing board, make some other points. So it's very, very exceptionally valuable to both have the opportunity to, try questions yourself, but also hear other people answer them. Another important element of this course is that there are a lot of topic areas that I think are important for all medical applicants to at least have a passing knowledge on. So it's just being able to speak intelligently about a bunch of different topics, which we're going to bring up in some way or another. Some we'll just touch on briefly. Some we might go into more depth. But I think a lot of people might not be exposed to these content areas before going into medical school. And I think it's very valuable as an applicant to be aware of these issues. Things like, how do we deal with, patients of Indigenous heritage, how we deal with children, how we deal, like what our approaches to substance use. And I'm not talking about like medical protocols for these things. I'm talking about how we approach them using sort of the lens that we use in medicine. And that's another thing that we're going to talk about, intersectionality, biopsychosocial models, and different lenses that we use in medicine. And being able to understand these and implement these will make your answers a lot stronger. Yeah. So I think that's the end of this video. I will, introduce myself more and, tell you more about what my background is and my experience in the first lesson of the course. But I thought that it would be really valuable if we made this video so that both as the first video of the course, but also for people who are considering whether or not to join, so that they can get an idea of sort of how I work and what will be involved in this course, and a framework and how valuable frameworks are for developing strong interview answers. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this useful, and I look forward to seeing you at lesson 1. Take care.